Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an ancient letter written almost 2,000 years ago. And it wasn't written in a time of peace. It was for people whose entire world was, well, literally and figuratively catching fire. So let's set the scene. It's AD 64. A massive fire just ripped through the city of Rome, and it burned for more than a week. The emperor, a guy named Nero, has a huge PR disaster on his hands, and he needs someone to blame. Fast. His target? This new, rapidly growing, and frankly widely misunderstood religious group called the Christians. You know, for the people getting this letter, this wasn't just some philosophical question. This was life or death. All of a sudden, their faith made them enemies of the state. They needed a game plan for survival, and they needed it now.
And the response comes in this letter from the Apostle Peter. Now get this, he's writing from the absolute heart of the empire, Rome itself, but he gives it a code name, Babylon, a symbol for pagan power and oppression. This message is an urgent dispatch to all these scattered communities who are right in the path of the emperor's fury.
And you can see here just how spread out these communities were across this huge area of what we now call Turkey. We're talking about a really diverse bunch of people, Jews and non-Jews, all brought together by their faith. And now they're united by this shared crisis. So Peter's letter had to travel all across this territory, carrying this critical message of hope into what had just become a war zone of persecution. I mean, this timeline really just drives home how quickly everything went south for them. In just a matter of months, they went from being a minority group to being official scapegoats for a national disaster. This wasn't just your local harassment anymore. This was state-sponsored persecution. And that made this letter not just some nice piece of encouragement, but an essential manual for spiritual survival. So how in the world do you prepare people for something like that? Well, Peter's first pillar of strength isn't a battle plan. It's not an escape route. It's something much deeper, a radical redefinition of their identity, right in the face of a world that was trying to completely erase it. He starts by calling them exiles and foreigners. Now that might sound pretty negative, right? But it was actually incredibly empowering. What he's telling them is, look, this hostile world you're living in, it's not your true home. Your real citizenship, where you truly belong, is in heaven. You're just passing through. And that means this earthly conflict doesn't get the final say over who you really are. And this is where it gets really good. As the world is slapping labels on them like arsonist and criminal, Peter hits back with 4 powerful, God-given titles. He isn't just trying to cheer them up. He is completely reframing their entire sense of self-worth and purpose. And what's so brilliant here is how each one of these titles is a direct counterpunch to their situation. They felt rejected by the world. Peter says, no, you are chosen by God. They felt powerless. He calls them a royal priesthood with a direct line to God himself. They felt like outcasts. He calls them a holy nation. They felt worthless. He says, you are God's own treasured possession. Their value wasn't being set by Nero. It was being set by God. And he doesn't even stop there. He tells them they aren't just a bunch of isolated people suffering all alone. No, he says you are living stones. Each person, no matter how small or how persecuted, is an essential building block in this new spiritual temple that God is building. What a powerful image of community and shared purpose, right? Okay, so you've secured their identity. But how does that actually play out day to day? Well, that brings us to Peter's second pillar, a really practical guide for how to live in this hostile world. And it's not about fighting back or hiding, it's something way more countercultural. The strategy was basically to silence their accusers through just exemplary conduct. This is just stunning. He tells them to submit to the very government that's persecuting them, not because they're scared, but for the Lord's sake. The whole idea was that their unimpeachable character, their respect for all people, and their love for each other would be such a powerful, undeniable testimony that their accusers just couldn't ignore it. And to show you just how deep this principle went, Peter takes it right into the home. In a culture where women and slaves were often treated like property, he calls for mutual respect. Husbands are told to treat their wives with honor, to recognize them as spiritual equals. This kind of household would have been a radical contrast to the Roman world all around them. All right, but let's be real. Even with the right identity and the right conduct, suffering was going to happen. It was unavoidable. And that brings us to a really crucial point. Peter's third pillar is all about reframing their pain. He argues that it wasn't random, and it definitely wasn't meaningless. He uses this incredible analogy. He says, just like fire is used to burn away all the junk from gold to reveal its true value, their trials were like a refining fire for their faith. The persecution wasn't destroying them, it was proving that their faith was genuine, and it was making it even more precious. But, and this is a big but, Peter makes a critical distinction. He says there's no honor in suffering because you did something wrong. If you suffer for being a criminal, well, that's just punishment. The blessing, the honor, comes from suffering unjustly for doing what is right. In that, he says, they are literally walking in the footsteps of Christ. And all of this, their identity, their conduct, their ability to endure suffering, it's all held up by one final ultimate pillar, an imperishable hope. The reason they could endure was because their hope was fixed on a future reality that no fire, no emperor, and no amount of suffering could ever touch. Peter describes their future inheritance with these three beautiful Greek words that all start with an A, which is a way of saying not. It is imperishable, it can't be destroyed. It is undefiled, it can't be stained. And it is unfading, it will never lose its glory. Think about it. Everything on earth can burn or break or decay. But their hope, he says, is kept for them in heaven, completely safe. He promises them that their faithfulness will not be forgotten. It's like how victorious athletes in the Greek games would get a crown. He says that crowns of life, glory, and righteousness are waiting for those who endure. It's this powerful picture of a future victory and honor that's already guaranteed. And this right here is the core promise. Their suffering, no matter how intense it feels, is just for a little while. But God's response, that's eternal. He himself will step in to restore, to confirm, to strengthen, and to establish them. The pain is temporary, but the foundation God is building through it is absolutely permanent. So, this ancient letter, forged in the middle of a crisis, it offers this timeless strategy for resilience. You ground your identity in who God says you are. You let your conduct be your testimony. You reframe your suffering as having a purpose, and you fix your hope on what is eternal. And all that leaves us with a pretty powerful question. In our own turbulent times, when the world can feel hostile, what is the unseen reality that gives us a living hope?